Today I'd like to start out with a little bit of a reminisce. If you watched the end of the last video, then this will be familiar to you. It's a little ode to an old friend of mine.
This is my good friend, the Empress Marava. She's been through a few campaigns now. She's had a few names, a few different coats of paint across her hull. A pirate flag has been trolled behind her, flowing in the vacuum of space. She's seen some things. But she's always been just the right size. She's had just the right number of nooks and crannies, of wads of gum and secret notes carved into the paint between lovers decades ago. Her engine room is a place where countless gremlins have manifested across the years. A place where parties have had to land on treacherous planets to procure that part that's going to get them going again. And this cargo bay has seen more than its fair share of illicit trade.
I think the Empress Marava exemplifies a perfect relationship between a piece of equipment and what the party and the game needs to have inertia and a story. Alright, so I painted you a picture in rose-tinted glass of a campaign of yesteryear and my memories from it. But I want to share with you today why I think the starships of Traveler are really an essential visual and iconic component of the game. Why is that? Because they really suggest a mode of play, and they create the circumstances for really interesting gaming. And it's all done just by kind of sketching in the boundaries. It's something that we're very familiar with in the way that there are classes in Dungeons & Dragons. The wizard, the cleric, the warrior. Well, in this case, there's the Type S Scout, the Empress Marava Free Trader, and of course, the Beowulf Free Trader. That loping bucket of bolts, ubiquitous across the game's history, and enshrined on the covers of so many editions of the game. I'm the Complex Games apologist. Let's look at why the starships of Traveler are special. In the last video, I pointed out to you that the Traveler universe is intimate to the characters. That the players and what they do is what matters more than whatever kind of giant explosive bombast is happening in so much of science fiction these days. It's zoomed in. And to reinforce that personal scale, so many of the ships of the Traveler universe are owned and operated by the player characters. And that means that they're smaller. Loading and unloading all the cargo, and maintaining the engines, and setting the course for the ship, and booking the cargo and passengers. These are the responsibilities of the player characters and really no one else. And that means that when you get into trouble, or when you score big, well, the party shares in that success. There's not this kind of intermediary where you need to give yourself a pat on the back because our team did well. No, it's all about the people around the table. Another important thing to point out about the starships that are iconic to Traveler is that they are frontier craft. And by that, I mean that they're not only smaller, but that they're really built for a lawless environment. They have some armaments, which always introduces the temptation to piracy, but also means that if there are things like hostile locals or perhaps competitors for a certain salvage, then the ship is not defenseless. And it also introduces that modulation where if the party wants to become the men who would be king on a primitive world, well, the temptation is there. But the militaries of Traveler are, of course, much more well-equipped, which means that if the party wants to move into that direction of piracy, which is almost cliché to how people play Traveler, then they have a little path to ascend up. And I think that some sort of advancement track in the story or in the nuts and bolts of how the character's gear is working in the universe is really an important thing to keep the fuel and the gasoline in campaigns. Now, say your players aren't interested in piracy and are just chasing kind of some big scores in trade or prospecting or trying to unravel interstellar conspiracies. Well, then upgrading the jump drive is a really cliche thing that you can do. And all of these ships, because they're kind of meant for general purpose roles, have a little bit of space in the cargo hold and inside of the other places in their hull for things like tweaks to be made. My third point is something that was really unexpected for me when I first brought Traveler to the table. Because these are personal starcraft, and because they are frontier ships, well, there's an interesting phenomenon where the party wants to play house when you unroll that deck plan onto the table. They start thinking about how they're going to move into various rooms, how they're going to set up the common room to be that homey place that we saw people eating around the dinner table at in Firefly. This is something which creates a center of gravity for your campaign, and I don't know how it happens, but it does. And on bigger ships or more cramped things that were more like kind of near future spaceships, like we see in something like 2001, I think that accessibility, that feeling that it's someplace where you might hang up your gun on the wall, is something that's harder to access in the imagination. But in Traveler, it's right there, ready to go. Now, nested within those concepts that these are personal ships, frontier ships, and places where people will play house, is that they will also feel responsibility towards them. There's going to be an affection that develops, and it's really important for why the party wants to keep the ship maintained, why they want to see it live to see another day, because after all, we've all seen kind of devil-may-care and even suicidal behavior among players that are looking for or absent motivation. But preserving the ship, looking out for the ship, or looking out for your companions when they've lost that motivation, well, that's one of the things that creates a center of gravity to gaming. That's one of the reasons that I think Traveler is really good. One of the criticisms of Traveler that you'll often hear is that the default campaign mode is something like Space Truckers, in the same way that there's a stereotype about D&D players that they like to hack and slash. Well, I have to tell you that the menu of options here and the modifications that are available for these ships open up a lot of doors. I mentioned bounty hunters earlier. There's the potential to do something like mercenaries or sort of even militaries of small planetary systems or small states in the person of the broadsword mercenary cruiser. And you could have sort of a soapier campaign where there's more inner character drama and perhaps the players start as less experienced spacers by using something like the subsidized merchant. I sketched out here how the player characters could fit in among a wider crew, and that way you could develop more relationships and kind of B-plots if that's something that you're interested in. And if you'd like to touch upon the themes of military sci-fi, and sort of things like Battleship Yamato or Battlestar Galactica, then the 400-ton patrol cruiser, or even the system defense boat, if you get a Battle Rider jump drive that docks to the back, well, that's a great option too. Now, I have, in my mind, a lexicon of all these ships. I can imagine them, and poof, they're there. I can describe the lines of them. I could even probably sketch them out on my little wet erase surface that I use for gaming, just freehand. And that comes from kind of a limited alphabet of ships. These are the ships of the frontier, not of the really big battles, nor of the hulking space lanes where millions of tons go across. This is where taking some exotic cheeses from one planet to another, or examining some eggs that may or may not be gemstones, well, these are adventure hooks and they're possibilities. What about when you decide to take those eggs back to the planet and the creatures that were brooding upon them, rather than selling them to market? Who's going to chase after you when you double-cross them? Well, now we're getting into the idea of adventure, which is what Traveler is all about. I'm the Complex Games apologist, and this video and many of my others are about Traveler. The last one was sort of a big hit, which was sort of a surprise to me because it was another kind of talk at the camera video like this one. If you're interested in seeing more content about Traveler and you're interested in kind of hearing my take on why it really works for the tabletop as a setting and a mode of play, then go ahead and hit the like and subscribe and share this around the internet. Next time I'd like to talk about something which may be a little bit less popular or even controversial, which is what's holding Traveler back from a renaissance, and why is the Traveler is sort of not as well known as it could be. Next time on the Complex Games Apologist.
Thank you for checking out my channel. If you enjoyed what you've seen here, maybe check out one of my in-depth video essays on topics in the tabletop gaming world, or subscribe with alerts so that you get updated anytime I put up new content here on YouTube. And above all, let me know what you think about this topic and about my videos in general by leaving a like or a dislike, and especially your own opinions in the comments below.